Brian Wilson, Mary Catherine Ham, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you, the Morning Majority. 105.9 FM, AM 630. WMAL.
6:37 on the Morning Majority. It's Brian Wilson. Brian Neiman is here. Mary Catherine Ham is off. We are joined by Karen Henready, a Republican strategist. That's that catch-all phrase we're using to describe you, though you're much more than that, Karen. And thanks for joining us here this morning.
That's fun.
Also on the line right now is Tom Bevan from RealClearPolitics.com. Tom, as I've said many times, I'm a real fan of your website because you guys really know how to sort of break down all of this data so that we can understand it. And I love to look at polls. And what you guys do is you take all of the polls and average them out. And generally, over time, you guys, that averaging has turned out to be very accurate when it comes to predicting races. It has.
And that's been one of the things. We were the sort of the originators of the poll averages. When we started the site back in 2000. And yeah, it was sort of an experiment, but over time, the averages, not only have they proven to be exceedingly popular for the reason you just stated, because there's so many polls out there. They're coming out, constantly, and a lot of times you'll get one poll one day showing one thing and another poll the next day showing something else, and the average tends to give you, I think, the best sort of snapshot in over time of what's going on in the race. And as you said, they've turned out to be very accurate. So,
all right, so as I look at the polls right now, I mean, I won't get into a lot of the numbers, but I see three trends emerging in the GOP nomination process. Number one, Kaine is softening a bit, but he's still looking fairly strong, and a lot of Republicans are going to stand by him for the moment. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
All right. Newt is beginning to surge. What's behind that?
Well, I mean, part of Kaine's softening. I mean, he has lost some support, and Newt's sort of the only one left standing. I mean, this wave of support has flown from Bachmann to Perry to Kaine, and now at least some of the folks who are maybe having some doubts about Kaine have been moving to Gingrich. And there's still a block of 10, 15, 20% of undecideds out there, depending on the poll.
That was the third point. There's still a lot of people out there on the Republican side of the equation who are either dissatisfied with the candidates they have or remain undecided. If you put those two numbers together, it's like 31%.
Right. It's still a pretty good chunk, and I think Newt has sort of risen to the top by process of elimination, but also because he's performed well in these debates, and that's one of the stories of this election season. It's something that we get into in this book that we have came out on Friday. This is the season for debates. I mean, they've proved to be hugely important in this nominating process this year.
Historically, when do people make up their mind on who to vote for when it comes to primaries? Do we know?
Well, typically they'll start dialing in, 2 weeks, 10 days, a week before. Okay. And you could see fairly dramatic swings in the final. I'll go back to 2004 when Howard Dean was leading. John Kerry was. This is in December. John Kerry was an asterisk in the polls. He actually had to mortgage his home in Beacon Hill for $600,000 to keep him going through the Iowa caucuses, which were just a couple of weeks later, and he managed to win and become the nominee. So you can see the last 7 to 10 days is when people sort of get dialed in and start making their decisions.
Tom, what about the fact that most candidates like Newt and Kaine aren't going to have the money to go on TV? The only two candidates who are really airing ads right now are Perry has a pretty decent-sized ad campaign going on in Iowa. Romney obviously has the money, and we know that TV ads influence voters. How do you see all of that playing in?
Well, that's been the thing that, especially with Newt, I think, and Kaine as well, is that they have picked up some money. I mean, with a higher profile comes more money, but at the same time, I mean, if you looked at the filings at the end of the third quarter, Newt was the guy with the least amount of money. He only had $500,000 in the bank or something like that. Now, he has said that his fundraising has picked up. He said he raised $2 million in the last 30 days or something, and he's been opening offices in some of these early states, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Florida. But again, he doesn't have the same sort of organization. Rick Perry, despite his troubles, and even if it's affected his fundraising, to your point, has $15 million in the bank.
Right.
and has already been airing some ads, and those will help. So I do think, one of these candidates, like a Kaine or a Gingrich, may be able to win Iowa or come out of Iowa with some momentum, but the question is, where do they go from there? And if they don't have the money to sustain, and they don't have the organization to sustain, it's going to be a pretty short-lived bump. And I think over time, especially, that's why I think people are giving Mitt Romney maybe a little bit more credit, and perhaps viewing him a bit stronger than his poll numbers suggest, because his poll numbers certainly are soft. And I think Rick Perry might be another one who, despite his troubles, could be around, could last a bit longer than people think, precisely because he's got the money to stick it out.
I always wonder about these statistics that I see when you ask the question of voters. Look, in the general election, Obama versus generic Republican, just whoever it turns out to be, you find that the generic Republican does very well. But yet when you start to put a name to that generic Republican, you run, okay, how would Obama do against Romney? How would Obama do against Kaine? How would he do against Gingrich? You find that Obama generally wins those matchups. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think in part it's because, dissatisfaction with Obama. So when you don't have a name attached to the Republican candidate, people are inclined to vote for him. I mean, the election is going to be a two-step process. The first step is it's a referendum on Obama, and the question is, do I want to reelect this person or not? If the answer is yes, you go ahead and vote for him. If the answer is no, then you turn to part B of the equation, and the question is, what's the alternative? And does this person, whoever that might be, if they reach a certain threshold of competence, then people will go ahead and vote for that person. And if they look at that person and say, gee, my alternative isn't that great, maybe I'll just, even though I really don't like Obama that much, or I'm not a fan of his policies over the last three or 4 years, the alternative isn't so great, so I'll go ahead and stick with him. So it is possible that despite the fact that you look at these state polls,
right,
on states, that he's underwater with independents, that he still may be able to eke out a re-election, despite the fact that the economy is as bad as it is.
All right.
All right, Tom. Good to have you on the program. Appreciate it.